Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We are coming from Washington, D.C. This is Sunday afternoon, about 5:30 p.m. as we're making this episode. We are probably in the 11th hour before Israel goes into the Gaza Strip and launches its operation. As we've been talking about many times on previous episodes, there is a lot of risk for everybody involved, for Israel, for the United States, for the countries of the region, both pro and con, and most acutely of all for the civilian populations that are in both on the Israeli side and in the Palestinian side within the Gaza Strip. And we now need to figure out, and we need to try to come to grips with really what's at stake here, because everybody understands that Israel was attacked, and some of the most vile, vicious attacks have been perpetrated by any terrorist group in recent memory. And I mean, to the point to where not just civilians were killed, but they were outright targeted. And in many cases, they were just brutally treated. Now, given our 9/11 experience, nobody is going to say that there's anything wrong with Israel getting revenge for its attackers and to bring justice for the Israeli civilians who have been brutalized by this attack. And I think everyone understands that. And there's really no question about that. The problem could come in, however, if they go in too hard and too heavy and too many innocent people get killed. So that's what we need to look at today. And that's what I want to do a bit of a deep dive on, to see what is at stake and what can we think may happen if this attack does indeed come off, possibly even hours after we're making this video here today. Now, first of all, I want to start with several things that were in the news just earlier this afternoon. First of all was the Israeli ambassador to the United States on CNN, and he was asked point blank, "We know that this operation is coming. We know you have positioned all of your troops, right near the border. What can we expect?" Here's what he said.
Can you give me any sort of sense of timing? Let's in next week. I know you have 300,000 reservists on the border, and is it an operation to rid Hamas of its military capabilities, its terrorist capabilities, or is it an operation to destroy Hamas completely?
So, as you noted, Israel was attacked. Hamas waged war on Israel, and they carried out one of the worst terror attacks in world history, if not the worst. And we have no choice but to strike back, and we are determined to destroy the Hamas war machine so that they cannot threaten us again. We do not want to be in that game where every few years they launch war against us or provoke us. That's over. And we are determined to destroy the war machine.
Okay, what he said there is very, very crucial, because it lines up with other comments we've heard, especially from Netanyahu. We've heard from a number of Israeli generals that they say, we're not just going in to punish Hamas, we're going in to destroy them, because we don't ever want to face them again. Now, part of the this analysis we're going to give here in subsequent deep dives here is that on the surface of it, look, it's one thing to get rid of Hamas, but it's another thing to get rid of the circumstances that gave rise to Hamas, and the conditions that have existed for many years prior to this were very instrumental in providing the foundation for the rise of this terrorist organization. And you can go in heavy-handed, and even if you somehow successfully either killed or captured every single one of the Hamas fighters, you still have not done anything to address the underlying conditions, and the Palestinian people are still going to be in that basically open-air prison. So that's something we're going to discuss a little bit more. But right now, I want to stick with the potential cost to the Israeli people. Now, also earlier today, you had Secretary Blinken go on and made a speech in the region to where he addressed what the United States' view on this, what we'll support, and most acutely at the end, he says what we need to be careful of.
Secretary Blinken says the U.S. will continue to assist Israel's right to defend itself from Hamas.
Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to defend itself against these attacks from Hamas and to try to do what it can to make sure that this never happens again. The way that Israel does this matters. Needs to do it in a way that affirms the shared values that we have for human life and human dignity, taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians.
Okay, that's crucial what he said there at the last, because Blinken understands that we have to maintain the public support of the United States, but also around the world, because we are commonly, taking Russia to task for putting civilians in harm's way, or whether it's the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, or it's certainly the Iranians. We're constantly talking about how they put their own people at risk. And for us to be able to maintain the moral position to keep on making those arguments, our big ally in Israel has to be able to have some kind of restraint and abiding by the international laws that we tell everybody else they have to follow. It's crucial that we do that. Now, it's war. Nobody's going to expect it to be a clean situation. We all understand collateral damage is an unavoidable part of war, and so it is. But there's a difference between unavoidable collateral damage and then being careless and wanton and creating huge amount of civilian casualties. Now, this is what we've seen so far, and it's already putting this in the gray zone and is already alarming a lot of people because of how many civilians are being killed, as we see in this report.
Israeli artillery and airstrikes have pounded Gaza in one of the most intense sustained bombardments the narrow strip of land has ever seen. Authorities in Gaza say more than 2,300 people have been killed, a quarter of them children. Hundreds of thousands of people have been heeding warnings from the Israeli military in leaflets dropped from the sky to evacuate from north to south. The UN says nearly 1 million people have been displaced, nearly half the territory's population.
Now, that's all prior to any kind of a ground incursion by the Israeli Defense Forces. They have stocked up now over 300,000 reserve forces, and that goes along with what they had on active duty. So you're talking well north of 400,000 total ground forces available, both watching the northern frontiers with Hamas, or with the Hezbollah, as well as what's getting ready to go into this operation here, clearly focused on the northern part of the Gaza Strip in the area of Gaza City. The destruction that the Israeli ground forces can bring to bear, it probably will dwarf what we've seen here if they go in completely unhindered and don't have any restraints at all. I mean, they are already talking about they're going to go in heavy from the sea, from the air, and on the ground. And so you can imagine if you've got tanks, artillery pieces, auto cannons, missile fire from the ground, artillery fire from the rear, and of course more rocket fire and missile fire from aircraft, that they could literally wipe out the city. Now, as I've said on a previous edition of Deep Dive, it is extraordinarily difficult for the Israeli Defense Forces when they're going in there, that they have a good rules of engagement that governs their activities, because there's allegedly up to 30,000, maybe even 50,000 Hamas fighters, but there could be hundreds of thousands of men of military age still in the combat zone. And how is Israel going to distinguish between Hamas fighter and innocent Palestinian man who's just trying to take care of his family, trying to protect what's his? Because if Israel goes in too heavy and just starts killing everybody, literally any man that they see with a gun, then the blowback could be severe. There was a great piece today, in fact, which illustrates some of this, published just hours ago in the Washington Post by Dan Lamoth. The headline is, "The Israeli ground offensive in Gaza could be a bloodbath," analysts say. And then right off the top of the batch, you can see him saying right off the here is that the Israeli soldiers preparing for a ground offensive in the Gaza Strip will face a hellish thicket of tightly packed buildings, mines, and tunnels while hunting Hamas militants who may bleed into this among the civilians, a precarious situation that could cause immense human suffering and draw other countries into the war. And that's one of the key problems and risks that we face, is that it's not just a moral backlash, but it could also draw in other people. Now, you see Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie, former Marine Corps, he's also concerned about this. I think that the Israelis are going to go back in heavy, and it's going to be a bloodbath for everyone. And therein is your real trouble. That's what I'm most worried about. Is that there's two things, of course. There's, first of all, Israel needs to maintain its Western support, because there was a big protest earlier on Sunday, I believe it was, in London, of 50,000 supporters for the Palestinian side. Those numbers will only expand if the Israeli side goes in there and just starts wantonly killing everybody, because all the cameras are going to be there. You can be sure that the Hamas fighters are going to have videos. There's going to be, every news feed from around the world, those both friendly and unfriendly to Israel, will all be rolling. So everybody's going to see what's going to happen here. This is not something that can be hidden. It's crucial that Israel maintain its moral superiority of its just response for what happened to these heinous terrorist attacks, but it can't go too far or they could lose support. That's one issue. The second issue, which could have more immediate impact, is if this expands into a larger war. Now, we've had just in the last hours, Iran seems to have walked back a little bit from its boisterous threats of earlier in this week. They're saying as long as they're not attacked, they're not going to get involved here. But they also had a caveat where it says, or any of our assets. And Hezbollah in Lebanon is an asset of Iran. So the real threat is, and the danger is, if Hezbollah does get involved with this, because Hezbollah has previously said that if Israel goes heavy into the Gaza Strip on the ground, then they're going to open up another front against Israel in the north coming out of Lebanon. Now, it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that, whether it does or doesn't. But there is real risk that if Hezbollah does make good on its threat and then they enter the war, it's possible then that Iran could conclude, especially if the casualties are super high, that maybe they're going to come in too. Now, we just don't know. There's so many things at stake. Every country is going to do what's in its national interest, and you can be sure that there's plenty of people warning Iran behind the scenes that if they do anything, that they're going to have an overwhelming retaliation and response against it, and the hope is that that will deter them from doing anything. But look, we've seen already that when people get desperate, they can sometimes make bad choices. Like there was no way that Russia should have attacked Ukraine in 2022. There was plenty of other options that Putin had open to him. He decided to take the worst one, the highest risk one, and the one that none of us wanted him to take, and he did it anyway. There was no specific compelling reason why they need to take this action now and then go and slaughter innocent Israeli civilians, but they did. Didn't make sense, and it caused a lot of problems. We can't hope that none of these things are going to have more bad things after this. The risk is very real, and it is absolutely vital that the United States do everything in its power to keep this conflict confined to the Gaza Strip. We don't even want it to be expanded into the West Bank or into Lebanon or with Hezbollah. We need to do everything in our power, diplomatically and through deterrence, to try and make sure that nothing happens to expand this war. And that also means that we need to be working very closely with the Israeli government, that they don't get too caught up in the emotion of wanting to get retribution for the justice for what happened to them, that they don't go too far and then they start actually causing themselves more trouble, than making it more possible that the war expand. It is my hope that the U.S. government does whatever it takes to keep this war from expanding and to keep it contained within the Gaza Strip and to take care of the people, all of them, as best we can, and to help our ally Israel get its justice, but not go too far that it puts even more people at risk. And that's your deep dive for today.